Recording in progress. Good morning. If everybody can take their seats, Joel, I can gavel us in. We are as soon as Joel comes and sits down.
I think he's in the room.
Okay. We're going to start. Good morning. Welcome to the March 12th Regional Planning Committee meeting. Before I move forward, I would like to ask our interpreter how to access interpretation.
Announcement from interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you're joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación, y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo.
First, I'll ask our clerk, Ms. Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum.
I'm sorry, I don't
You
think your
can't?
mic was on. I couldn't hear.
First, we will ask our clerk, Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum this morning. Voting jurisdictions that are absent are East County and North County Inland.
Thank you. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we call home. The tribal nations of the San Diego region have historically faced injustices. We acknowledge that harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 18 tribal nations in our region, the most in any county in the United States. From 4 cultural groups, the Kumeyaay, the Agayanaya, the Luisanya, the Kupanya, and the Cahuilla. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego community, we acknowledge this legacy. We aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge and experiences in undoing the injustices of the past. I will now call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. On to item number 1, non-agenda public and member comments. For our board policy, the amount of time allowed for each verbal public comment is determined based on the number of agenda items, the complexity of these items, and the number of persons anticipated to offer comment. This allows us to hear from as many people as possible and to complete our business while we still have a quorum. Based on those factors for today's meeting, each member of the public will be allowed 2 minutes for their comments. Francesca, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. We do. We have three in the room with us. We'll start with Purita Javier and Cesar Javier. If you're a member of the public online who'd like to speak, please do raise your hand now.
Glenn.
Yes. You say good morning.
Uh,
Good morning.
and
Yeah.
good morning. Ito,
Yes.
August 27, 2024.
Lumapit ka dito.
Okay.
Lumapit.
The city mayor, city council, members, city attorney, city development services department, city planning department, San Diego Police Department, city land use the environment group to whom it may concern. We, the residents of Choyas Parkway, Streamview, Salta, Boise, Mina, Limona, 51st Street, Bank of Choyas, Creek of District 9, certified and report that a home business at 5338 Streamview Drive, ceramics manufacturing and kiln industrial operation has been operating since December 17, 1984 and renewed December 31st, 2024 in our community designated as residential zone. Ceramics kiln industrial activity is known to produce.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Cesar Javier, followed by Samrath Vaca.
Welcome. Dito.
Mm.
Welcome.
Son.
Thank God. Thanks, Sandag. Good morning to everyone. We revere the doctrine of consistency and repetition. Ma'am Donnie, welcome. Welcome. You are our idol. When you're joining with the San Diego Power, won unanimously. We were there. This is the right person in the right job, Ma'am Donnie. Thank God. There is a person here sowing contagious political disease. Councilor, I do not know the first name, but Lee. Sir Lee, we have been asking you as the chair working committee on land use. This is wrong. This is not supposed to be in a zoning we call residential because there are humans. There are lowest form of animals right there. And you did not ignore, you did not look into our community issue. This is not personal, sir, because we are part of the governance. Our elected officials, 11 of them, sorry for my language, I'm nervous. I must speak the truth. They are subject to investigation. And proven right, they should be apprehended and punished to the full extent of law. Why? We have here evidence. Not a single centavo in the budget system is allocated for the victims and the cleaning of the mess of Tijuana River Valley issue. It is being covered. It is ignored. It is neglected.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Samath Vaca, followed by Marco Espinoza.
Good morning, members of the committee, and thank you for your time today. My name is Samarth Vaca, and I'm presenting a proposal of how data-driven and AI-based traffic signal optimization can improve intersections efficiency and reduce congestion across our existing infrastructure. So the problem is that drivers spend 7 to 10% of every trip just sitting at red lights. So across the US, that idle time burns 6 billion gallons of fuel at intersections every year, releasing 28 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the air. Here's how we can start solving it. Unfortunately, I couldn't put a simulation I made on the screen, but I intend to do that tomorrow at the board of directors meeting. So in my simulation, I have multiple different settings, and I trained machine learning models and put them against each other. In that test, fixed timing models came out with the worst results with the highest average wait times, and the best wait times was the model the system with the best model was the DQNet model. So it scored a 62 in average wait time, resulting in a 35% reduction in the average wait time in the simulation. My full code and methodology are on GitHub and are available upon request. Our next steps are in San Diego's major roads, the 5, 15, and the 8, the cross city and the county lines. No single city controls the full route, which means that the coordinate signal timing across them requires exactly the kind of regional body that SANDAG has. The simulation data shows a meaningful improvement over what's in place today. What I'm asking for is a straightforward identify one stretch of road, review the
Thank you very
methodology.
much. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Marco Espinoza, and Marco will be our final speaker on this item.
Hello, good morning, Marco Espinoza. I just wanted to say that I was virtually present and good luck with a very healthy, productive meeting. I yield back to the chair.
That concludes the public comments.
Thanks. Mario, are there any SANDAG updates you'd like to share?
Yes, Chair, several. Sorry, the agency update. It probably wasn't chair of this committee, but the 2025 regional plan has been officially approved by the federal government and the state government on record time. So that's great news. Recently, we've been traveling to Sacramento, several team members, including our chair. We had lots of meetings with state legislators, administration officials, and others to discuss priorities like Lozan, Otay Mesa East, housing, and Senate Bill 375 reform. I also met with the mayor of Tijuana this week and had a discussion about transportation as well as their plans and how they're funding solid waste removal. Why is it so important for us? Because it's related to the Tijuana River issue. So he briefed us on their efforts and how we can increase the partnering in that area. Regarding the working group structure, we had mentioned at our last meeting that we were going to bring to an item to executive committee about transitioning the working groups for TC and regional planning committees and make them task forces. So that has been approved. So we will be moving forward with that also. Another item very general for the agency and very good news. I'm happy to welcome Everett Townsend as the new upcoming Senior Director for Regional Transportation Services. Everett is going to be starting March 23rd. He was formerly the acting district director at Caltrans, and he has a wealth of knowledge in operations and maintenance. Also on some project updates, very happy to announce the Smart Road Initiative Program. $55 million have been awarded to 36 projects on 6 to 16 local jurisdictions for our Smart Road Incentive Programs. Yesterday, we broke ground on the University Bikeway, which is 2.8 miles of a project that it's going to be more of a corridor project than a bike lane project. It includes the communities of Mid-City, North Park, and La Mesa. So we're very, very happy about that. Also, as part of our Del Mar Bluffs Phase 5 project, which one of the elements has to place a permanent cable railing along the east side of the newly built drainage channel at 11th Street. But also the contractor will be installing temporary fencing during the construction period to control the access on the project. Now, if you're driving on I-5 in North County between Encinitas and Carlsbad, you may be seeing some equipment in the center of the roadway that's being installed. Caltrans is developing a pilot to look into new technology, to look into the HOV lanes, the occupancy, as well as tolling. So if you see that equipment, this is a pilot program just to check on occupancy. The goal is basically to be able to look into that, monitor the occupancy. And at the long run, it's a safety issue for our highway patrol and other officials who have to be patrolling that area. So this is something that we're really excited about. And you're all going to have today a discussion on the environmental mitigation program. But we wanted to share our appreciation to Senator Jones for submitting a budget request on our behalf for the land conservation and habitat restoration priorities under Prop 4. So thank you to Senator Jones, and that concludes my report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments from committee members? I will just add one, congratulations to you and staff for getting everything approved by the city, the state and feds. That's very fast. I mean, I'm just kind of shocked. So kudos to all.
The team, yeah.
Yes. May I have Francesca? We're going to move to the consent agenda. Francesca, do we have any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We do. If you're a member of the public online, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak to the consent agenda. In the room with us, Cesar Javier will go first.
Thank you. Let's approve the minutes. The process is good, better, best. One value analysis. Evidence of its efficiency and effectiveness, such as winning public trust. We haven't seen people here celebrating and thanking Sandag for a well done job. Have you not noticed that, Madam Chair, Dana? Basic evidence. We're only 3 here now. And some non-speaking virtual participants to celebrate 1 or 2 or 3 of the hardworking, talented member association. I think this is the opposite of a member here. I wish Councilor Lacaba is here, relevant to the evidence we wanted to speak of. And they should be saying, I'm sorry, public, I am not capable, so I am stepping down. I think that is one way of winning public trust. Councilor Lee, if you cannot do your job related to the minutes we have been speaking here many times, God help, let others capable do it because we are wasting time and it impacts health and safety of San Diegans. Thank you, Sandag, for this learning university. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Do any members have comments or questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion to recommend the consent agenda? May I have a second? The original motion offered by Kent Lee, second by Joel Anderson. Thank you. Please vote.
That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you. Moving on to reports. Item number 5, item number 4. We're going to start with the Regional Environmental Mitigation. Welcome Kim Smith and Kirsten Uchel from Sandag, Jacob Armstrong from the county, and Stephen Cook from Intersecting Metrics will provide a 2-part presentation on efforts to increase the efficiency of mitigation by taking a collaborative regional approach. We'll be taking public comment after the second item. And did you want to start this off? Keith?
Yes, thank you, Chair Downey. Keith Greer, I'm your Deputy Director of Environmental Planning here at Sandag. Good morning, committee members. So item 4 is a discussion related to environmental mitigation programs here at Sandag. So you may recall that federal and state law requires projects to compensate whenever development has an environmental impact. And this compensation is called mitigation. For example, when our transportation projects and our rail projects impacts a wetland, and we have to impact that wetland, we have to compensate or mitigate by providing and restoring wetland resources. So mitigation traditionally has been done on a case-by-case, project-by-project basis, and it becomes really costly and timely to that project because you're trying to identify what constitutes mitigation, you're trying to secure that mitigation, and get it approved by federal and state agencies. And all that adds time and cost to our projects that we're trying to deliver. So today you're going to hear about programs aimed to increase the efficiency of these programs by taking a regional collaborative approach towards mitigation. So in our first item 4.1, Kim Smith here will provide a status update on the EMP that Sandag has been implementing over the last 18 years. This is a regional mitigation program for biological resources. It's had a lot of success over the years and is facing some challenges coming here in the near future. And we'll be discussing those challenges and some options that we have and we've been thinking about. The other item, 4.2, is a report out on vehicle miles traveled mitigation study. Sandag staff and county have been working on this study. It's mitigation for vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is a more recent state requirement as required on SB 743. So Kirsten Ucatel from Sandag and county staff, Damian Davis and Stephen Cook, will talk about the opportunities and challenging of taking a regional approach towards VMT and the possibilities of possibly taking on a regional approach to do some kind of mitigation on the regional level. So our intent today is to have a robust discussion with the committee members. So along the way, if you want to stop the presentation, ask questions of the presenters, please do so. We really want to have a meaningful dialogue with you. To that end, we actually have some questions at the end of the presentations to prompt discussions that we've been thinking about and have that input for you as we move forward on these items. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kim Smith.
Thank you, Keith, and good morning, Chair Downey and members of the committee. Like Keith said, my name's Kim Smith. I'm a senior regional planner here at Sandag, and I've been managing the Transnet Environmental Program for a little over 9 years now. Bear with me today. I'm recovering from a cold, so I might have to pause to take a drink. But today's presentation is going to include an overview of the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program, our past accomplishments, current status, and of course, some of our future challenges. So please, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I can pause. So just by a quick show of hands, how many folks here are native to San Diego?
Wow.
Wow. Okay. Oh, wow. Wow. Well, I think we can all agree, native or not, that San Diego is a very special place. It is also a very ecologically diverse region. I mean, where else can you can start your morning at the San Diego Lagoon, walking the Marsh Trail. You can wind up in the afternoon in the pine forest of Julian, and then back down to Anza Borrego to look at the super bloom, all within about half a day. So that's a pretty special place. Well, due to its diverse topography, those geological conditions, and a mild Mediterranean climate, the San Diego region contains several rare and unique ecological and biological resources that make it a global biodiversity hotspot. Human development has created tremendous habitat loss. Thus, San Diego County also has more endangered species than any other county in the continental US. And back in the early 90s, I think most of us can remember the early 90s, this created quite a bit of conflict. Former Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt once told a congressional committee that large-scale conservation planning is needed to avoid an economic train wreck that these and the future listing of endangered species would cause. So in the early 1990s, the state of California did that, and they responded with natural community conservation planning, a proactive ecosystem planning effort for the protection of multiple species and their habitats through the adoption of integrated habitat conservation plans by our local jurisdictions. And the goal of these plans is to protect multiple species of concern and their habitats while still allowing for planned development and economic growth. Fast forward now, we're 25 years in, and the region has successfully conserved over 90,000 acres of land through the implementation of 2 sub-regional habitat conservation plans. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the MSCP, or the Multiple Species Conservation Program, and the MHCP, the Multiple Habitat Conservation Program. 2 additional plans for the northern and eastern portions of the county are still pending. So moving on to the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program, how does this fit in? So just as a quick reminder, the Transnet EMP is part of our Transnet extension, the half-cent sales tax approved by voters in 2004. The goal of the EMP is to promote advanced acquisitions of habitat in order to mitigate impacts from our regional and local transportation projects. In addition, it also provides funding for regional habitat conservation purposes, including land acquisition, management, and monitoring, to help implement those regional habitat conservation plans that I just mentioned. So on the screen, it's kind of small, but this is the annual Transnet revenues. And as you can see, a total of 6.2% comes in and goes directly to the EMP. 4.4 goes to the major corridor project EMP, and that's the first bucket, and then 1.8 to the local project EMP. And the good news, at least for the EMP, is that this percentage of revenue is lockbox, meaning it can't be, all funding has to stay with the EMP, and it can't be used to fund other aspects of Transnet. So how does the program work? The program acquires and manages large areas of land with native habitats early in advance of those transportation projects that need mitigation. And we've been very successful. It's allowed us to reduce overall cost, to accelerate the delivery of our transportation infrastructure projects, to implement those regional habitat conservation plans, and also it's helped us decrease the listing of species as threatened or endangered. The EMP has served as a national model for other agencies like Caltrans and the Orange County Transportation Authority for advanced mitigation. And I always like to include this one. This is a great example of the EMP at work. At the 11th hour, this is on the Midcoast Trolley Project, the federally listed endangered fairy shrimp, and that's the little guy in the circle, the white circle there on your screen. I kind of like to equate them to if you were, when you were younger, you ever saw those little sea monkeys, kind of looks like that. Well, this little guy was found in our project alignment. And fortunately, because the Transnet EMP was in place, Sandag was able to use land that was already acquired for mitigation. And within just 1 week, the agencies approved, resulting in no delays to the project. So on the screen above is just a laundry list of accomplishments since the inception of the EMP in 2004. You can see that we've acquired over 9,000 acres by EMP and our conservation partners. We've restored over 960 total acres of land. We've invested over $300 million in open space. we've secured mitigation, and this is a really important one, for over 3/4 of our Transnet early action projects. So like Keith mentioned at the beginning, we're able to secure mitigation early in order to move those transportation projects forward. And then, of course, we've banked over 500 acres of habitat for local and regional transportation projects. So another success was during the first 10 years of our program, we were able to take advantage of lower land costs during the recession, shown in the light blue box. And we were able to acquire land for about half the cost of what was originally estimated, resulting in a significant cost savings early on in the program. And then the regional monitoring program has also been another success for our region. To date, the EMP has secured over 64 million in funding for regional management and monitoring activities. Some of those shown on the screen above. We've awarded 136 land management grants totaling over 18.8 million to local jurisdictions, nonprofits that have benefited over 71 species of rare plants and animals. And probably what I think I'm most proud of in our program is the establishment of the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, or SDMMP. The program coordinates science-based biological management and monitoring of conserved lands with over 115 partner organizations through the San Diego region. And then finally, our program not only has been able to acquire lands, but also restore native habitats, banking over 500 acres of habitat credits with over 400 available as mitigation for regional and local transportation projects. And unfortunately, there has been a very little demand since the inception of the program for mitigation for local streets and roads. I think since I've been here, I've maybe only worked on 4 to 5 projects that have taken advantage of this local EMP. One of the examples that I put on the slide above is the San Dieguito Lagoon. We created wetland habitat for impacts for the I-5 North Coast Corridor program. But the city of San Diego was also able to use this mitigation for their El Camino Real bridge widening project. Again, being able to tap into those local mitigation credits. And maybe this is a question I can throw out right now to the group is, I'm not sure if any of you are aware that that local projects also can use local mitigation credits or the local EMP. I don't know if any of you were aware of that. As long as it's in the RTIP, then it qualifies. And so we're able to help jurisdictions. We've got habitat banked. We're able to help jurisdictions streamline some of their permitting process and able to use habitat that we already have.
We're wondering if the lack of use is because people don't realize this resource is available to them, or if there just isn't a need.
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like for instance, at our last council meeting, we have a nonprofit group in Lemon Grove. They're called the Busy Bees, and their director came in and talked about their desire to create a wildlife corridor, and she even has like a spot in mind for that. And I haven't had a chance. I wanted to talk to her more about it. I mean, is that like, would that cover something like that, or?
Potentially, if it was, they were using it. I mean, mostly jurisdictions are coming in looking to compensate for, we'll provide the mitigation that they need in order to get their permits to build their project. But if it was a wildlife corridor that also included, wetland creation or, upland creation or restoration, potentially.
Okay, all right.
Okay, moving on to the current status of our program. So where we currently are, well, as I've mentioned, we've completed most of our acquisitions, so we were able to take advantage of those low land costs early on in the program. We don't really have any need right now for new acquisitions because we do have these mitigation land credits banked for our transportation projects. So what we've been focusing on is wrapping up restoration efforts on current projects. On the screen are two of our largest lagoon restoration projects, San Elijo and San Dieguito Lagoons, both serving as wetland mitigation for our larger I-5 North Coast Corridor program. Both projects have wrapped up construction and are currently in the 10-year monitoring period. Yes, 10 years, that's a long time, as required by our permits. Construction of these lagoon projects, they are extremely expensive. In addition to we have to add into the cost for monitoring and management for 10 years to fulfill those permit obligations. In addition, as we do these large scale lagoon projects, things come up. I'll use San Elijo, for example. Right now, we're grappling with the inlet seems to keep closing up. So more sand is coming into the system. And this was something that was not planned for. And so all of these management issues cost more resources. And especially if we're trying to protect the investment we already made into these systems.
Can I ask before you change that slide, put that slide back on? Slide 13.
There we go.
Can you identify that large on the bottom left corner? What is
Ooh,
that?
That is an octopus. So the great result of the San Elijo Lagoon Restoration Project is that because we opened up those tidal channels, you can see on the top, we got more tidal circulation coming in. And so we did increase the biodiversity at the lagoon. And so I think in that first year, we found things like octopus, there was sea lions coming up into the lagoons, species that they hadn't seen there.
Those in that area. So
Yeah.
kudos to the plan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then in addition, we're currently also working on transferring additional mitigation properties. These properties were purchased with EMP funds purchased by Caltrans, so they're state-owned properties, and we need to transfer these to qualified land managers. Our permit requirements for all of those transportation projects that I mentioned obligated the EMP to provide endowments for the management of these mitigation sites in perpetuity. So we have to provide the funding for a qualified land manager to manage these forever. And currently our program does not have that funding. So to wrap up, while the EMP has had its fair share of successes, as I presented, and it's shown there on the left side of your screen, it also faces some challenges. First challenge is our short-term cash flow issue. So at the beginning of the overall program, to get it started, we bonded it against the program in addition to borrowing funds from our major corridor projects. Now we're in a repayment period, and the EMP won't be going back into the positive till about 2036. In addition, as mentioned above, we just completed those back-to-back large lagoon restoration projects that cost over $200 million to just construct. And this was really a calculated decision at the time to allow the I-5 North Coast Corridor program to move forward. However, it has affected our short-term cash flow or cash flow in the short term. And then moving on to endowments. In that slide, I showed some photos of some of our properties. We have over 30 properties that will need endowments for the long-term management and perpetuity. And as I said, currently our program does not have the funding to cover these obligations. Future funding for the SDMMP. So SANDAG historically has allocated $4 million in funding for regional management and monitoring. This funding right now is only guaranteed through 2029, where again, we will see a short-term cash flow issue until a regional funding source is secured. And then I did briefly touch on the utilization of existing mitigation credits. As mentioned, we have over 400 acres of credits available, and there has been very little demand for mitigation for our local streets and roads. So we do have a surplus of mitigation that is being left on the table. And then finally, changes in project mitigation over time. As we've gone on to permit impacts for many of our transportation projects, we have more requirements. We have unseen requirements, which means more monitoring and ultimately more money spent. So what are our next steps? Managing this cash flow issue of the EMP is part of a larger discussion on how best to leverage funding sources to advance the delivery of projects and programs throughout the San Diego region. And back in November of last year, the Board of Directors approved a project delivery strategy that included the EMP. And one possible solution for the EMP cash flow issue, which we'll open up for discussion, would be to allow the major corridor EMP. If you can recall on that flow of funds slide, that was the first bucket of EMP funding, the 4.4, to allow that to borrow funds from the other bucket, the local EMP, with repayment coming later in the program. And managing the regional and local EMP as one fund instead of two funds or two buckets is consistent with past performance audit recommendations. In addition, I think Mario did mention earlier on that we did hear good news that potentially a portion of the funding needed for our endowments were included in Senator Jones' budget request. So we'll hope to see if these funds are included in this year's budget, and that would really help out in the short-term cash flow. These proposed strategies will further be discussed as part of the project delivery strategy at the board retreat next week. And then staff is going to work with Caltrans to develop a 5-year work and expenditure plan for the implementation of the EMP, return to RPC in the late fall, seeking recommendation to the board. So that concludes the presentation, and I'm going to now turn it over to Keith.
Could I ask? I have a question if I could before we move to Keith. I'm sorry to hear that the North County and East County plans have not been officially finished. So my question is, all the funds that we're talking about, and we need to find them, we need to fund it in perpetuity, none of that will go to the East County or the North County because they don't have their plans finished. So I'm trying to figure out, where are they? I mean, I thought 10 years ago they were eventually going to be finished. So is it just something that's not going to happen, or is there something we should be doing?
So as far as I know, the North County plan, the North County MSCP is supposed to be finalized in 2027. That's what we're being told. And then the East County plan, I don't even think they've started to work on that. So
if it's, assuming it makes 2027, then will we have more need to be funding? Because right now we don't have anything in that plan that we've got is for habitat, right? We don't have any banked anything.
as far as I believe, the jurisdictions may need help with regional management monitoring, management of concerns land. So there will be a bigger gap, right?
That's what I was assuming. Just wanted to make sure that was aware. Thank you. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Why don't you put this on? So we have a list of discussion questions, and whatever the committee would like to do, I can frame each question and then we can pause after each question, have a conversation, or I can go through all 4 of them right now. And my inclination is to kind of frame each one and have a conversation. So the first question we have is, should Sandag seek reimbursement from federal and state funds for mitigation already achieved through the EMP? And just to frame this question, our Transnet funds are local funds, and what we try to do is attract state and federal funds. And for our capital delivery, that works very well and we're very successful. But the EMP program is an advanced mitigation, meaning we don't have a project right now. We are mitigating now, and we are future have projects use that mitigation. So the EMP Transnet funds has provided all the mitigation, all the funding for the mitigation to date. No federal or state funding. The philosophy has been is that we provide that mitigation now, we'll get additional federal and state dollars for construction. That model we think needs to change. So our question is, should, when we provide mitigation for a future federal or state funded project, should we also be asking for mitigation reimbursement? And so that's our first question, is how we handle the mitigation for future federal and state obligations.
I like the question, but why would we not? I mean, I don't understand what the downside of that would be.
There is no downside. I think this is one of the biggest lessons learned in my career at Sandag is we should have done that, and we are just catching up to that now. So we don't see a downside on it. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Does anybody want to discuss it further?
Yeah.
Okay.
These questions get harder. Kim was mentioning that the EMP is made up of 2 programs. One's for regional projects, like our regional rail and our regional highway programs, and it provides all the mitigation there. The other fund's for local streets and roads. And you saw that we have about 500 acres of land, mitigation banked, ready and going, but there hasn't been much demand. So our question is, should we seek to maximize the use of that local EMP by allowing it to fund some of the regional EMP where there's a need, and then at the end of the program, reimburse the local streets? So it's a cash flow issue between these 2 funds. They both have to be made whole, but we have a short-term cash flow in the regional, which we'd like to borrow from the local. Again, we see no downside to none, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Again, did you want to say something, Bruce?
I guess what I was trying to understand is the magnitude of the dollars that you're talking about. How many dollars are we talking? How long for the borrowing? And since these are statutorily set, in other words, the 1.8% and 4.4, I assume we have to ultimately abide by spending it in the proper category, unless you can tell me there's some statutory relief there.
So you are absolutely correct on all that facts. Two programs, both lockboxed, both have to be spent in those boxes. Right now, our projections are that we have a short-term cash flow for the regional projects, and then it goes surplus at the end of the program.
Yeah.
Right now, for the locals, there's no demand, so it's keeping growing year over year over year. And our intent is to borrow from that local program, but it gets repaid back at the end of the program itself.
So what's short term? How many years?
10 years. So we have a
Years.
10,
That's short term? What's long term?
30 years into the
Okay.
program.
Wow, okay, yeah, your idea of short term and my idea
I'm
of
not gonna
short
win.
term are way different. And dollars. I usually like to, we talk about borrowing. How many dollars are we talking about? Can we put a cap on it? And a duration on it? That's what I'd like to do.
All that's part of the project delivery strategy, which we'll be discussing at the board retreat and part of a larger picture of not just the EMP, but part of the Transnet program itself. Right now, we have estimated $60 to $70 million need for the regional programs, 60 to 70 million.
Okay.
And again, we have to do what they call a plan of finance to make sure there's capacity and the repayment and all that stuff. That hasn't been done yet, but that's the outstanding need that we have.
Okay. And our annual revenue, just roughly for 4.4% for the regional and 1.8% for the local.
Don't have that for you, Mayor, but
But-
we can get that back. And when the board retreat happens, we'll make sure we have those numbers.
But it's like 2% of 400 million
Yeah,
in
so
that range, right? So
It's probably, I was checking the curves. It's, don't quote me on this one, but it's about 100 or more million of debt payment. So that goes first, right? So the 400 million, it may be of 300 or less, which is the percentage that you will be applying. Because after that, the paying the bonds that are already issued, but that's going to be, at the retreat, we'll have all those numbers like now.
okay.
And I think it's important to, I think the team mentioned this, but we're also doing research on the lock boxes and seeing what are the approvals needed. Because it may be a broader discussion of consolidating several of those boxes and making them basically into main columns like capital, local, and O&M. That could be, but those are things that I think are going to be a pretty robust conversation during the retreat to look into how can we just not have flexibility for our environmental mitigation program, but to deliver projects as a whole, as well as providing funds to the locals and the operations and maintenance issues the transit agencies are having.
And I was just going through just rough numbers to get an idea how much money is going into the local. And if you take roughly 400 million times the 1.8%, it's about 7-8 million a year.
yeah, the
Right.
number that comes to my mind has been over 10, so 10 to 11 million per year.
Right.
Yeah, and
That
just looked at these
doesn't-
numbers a couple weeks ago, so, but
Yeah,
yeah.
well, there's
close.
7 or 10, but I'll look forward to the numbers, and it just seems like when we're talking, 60 to 70 million, it's going to be 100% shunted over there, and would we pay interest back in, and all sorts of questions. I'll have more questions at the retreat. Thank you.
I know the programs require interest repayment, so that is correct. It would require interest.
Any other comments on that item? I look forward to discussion at the retreat.
Item number 3 here is we have 30 properties that we acquired for state requirements for mitigation. They're currently held by Caltrans. So they are bought for highway widening projects. They are held by Caltrans and the projects have all been built. But the permit obligations haven't ended. So lands have been restored. They're sitting there waiting. One of the last permit obligations is to transfer that over to qualified land managers as required by the state. But no land manager will take properties without an endowment. Endowments for future management to make sure the properties are maintained in the correct states. Endowments are very, very expensive. It's the one area of the EMP program that the architects, when they created it, missed. They just didn't envision this much cost. So we have about, what's the cost for 50, 60 million? No.
About 58 million.
$50 million of our outstanding obligations are just for endowments. Now you've heard that we're working with the state to find federal state funds for those endowments. But we have this item with Caltrans is how should we work together? Because right now there's a state land, a state obligation for state permits, but they keep working back to Trans and EMP to pay for that, and there's no funding for that. So we have an obligation, but we don't have the funding to implement that obligation. And so we're trying to figure out how we work together to fill that gap.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
If I understood the beginning of this, Caltrans had the initial obligation. Is that correct?
It's Caltrans permits, but we
Okay.
as Sandag
Stop.
are the regional team.
Stop right there.
Uh-huh.
It's Caltrans permits. How did we somehow as lawyers, and we have lots of lawyers on our board and we've hired through the years, miss that we didn't have that written into the agreement with Caltrans?
Well, remember the Transnet program at large is
Mhm.
our contribution to those projects. So we're the funding agency for regional transportation. We work with our partners Caltrans. So in a sense, their permit obligations are our permit obligations. And so now we work collectively to fill those out. But again, as we've looked at the Transnet funds, it's been to date, traditionally, all Transnet funds, all local funds to pay for that management. And we don't think that's necessarily right, but we are trying to navigate that.
I'm
Sorry,
happy
let's
to go
jump
on
in.
the record that it's not right. I don't know if anybody else disagrees with that, but I think we probably need to figure out then how to move forward. So I take it that'll be another retreat discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
In one of the possibilities of looking at it, nobody's gonna come and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna put that skin, right? But when the early action item projects were coming, there was a lot of excitement to get them out. So who cares, right? It was early in the Transnet ordinance, funds were coming in, we're just gonna do it. I think that that's where the conversation has to be had on the proportionality of the project costs, meaning if a project receive X of mitigation and that project infrastructure through its life was funded with 30% federal, 60% state, and 10% local. I think it should be somewhere where what we should be targeting, that the project participation percentages should be the somewhat commitments of the endowments, because that was part of the to mitigate projects, right? Of course, it was done in advance of the projects to be able to expedite the early action items. But reality is catching up with us. And we need to be thinking about that. So yeah, we should be looking for reimbursement. But we should also be kind of having some objectivity of, kind of like, hey, this project got funded so much percentage by local dollars. That's what we can put in on the mitigation endowment.
Is there any ability, as we're working through this, to draw a line in the sand, and we're not doing it ever again unless we have that decided up front? I mean, we're going to keep building. It's not like we're going to stop. We've got a big plan we just approved, lots of discussion. So how do we work that in to drawing a line in the sand today and figuring out going forward?
So one of the other lessons learned in this program is you should never acquire property unless you know the total cost, including who's managing the land and how much, and setting aside that management dollars. When we bought these lands 15 years ago, starting that time frame, that wasn't a consideration. And that is something we should definitely be doing in the future. But as Kim mentioned, we're not acquiring property right now. There's no need. So we're trying to figure out how we deal with this back issues that have been created.
And that might help a little. Because when we're talking with Caltrans, it's not saying a future obligation. Let's just take out the ones that we have now and divvy it up. So did anybody else have any questions or comments on that item? Okay, and your last bullet?
The last one deals with regional management and monitoring. So as Kim's presentation showed, that the EMP was supposed to build off these efforts in the region to create these habitat conservation plans. One of the principles that was adopted with the ordinance was that SANDAG through the EMP would provide some money towards regional management of lands and regional monitoring of those lands. So for the last 18 years, we've been providing funding for this effort. It's done some great work. The creation of a San Diego Management Monitoring Program has been lifted up. But our obligations under that are ending in 3 years, and we're looking towards the future. Right now, the habitat conservation plans in the region envisioned that there would be a future funding source. It hasn't materialized. So as SANDAG staff, we're bringing this issue to you to say, in 3 years, there's no more obligations for this, but we need to shift. And how does that shift look like? Should there be a different form of governance, such as a JPA or some other form? And should we seek some cost sharing so it's not entirely funded through the EMP program? And that's a more difficult question, but it's one that SANDAG we need to deal with as we're looking at the last 3 years of this obligation that we have.
And 3 years is really just right around the corner. So we really want to have a strategy and plan in place much sooner.
Is this going to be a discussion at the retreat where we look at funding options?
I think not yet. We're looking at the EMP and delivery of SANDAG's projects. What we'd like to do is after we figure out the EMP, we'd like to bring to you solutions for the regional issues of habitat conservation later in the year. So we're a piece of it, but we're not the totality. We have been working with the jurisdictions such as the County of San Diego, who's a major player in this, the City of San Diego, to say, what does the future look like for you guys in managing these lands and what's needed? What's the gap? So we're doing a habitat assessment. Kim will come back later in the fall and have that conversation with you.
Thank you very much. Did anybody else have any questions or comments on that piece? No? Okay, thank you.
That concludes item 4.1. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kirsten Ucatel for item 4.2 on the regional VMT mitigation study. Kirsten?
Good morning, Chair, members. My name is Kirsten Ucatel, and I am a senior planner in the Environmental Compliance Group at SANDAG and the SANDAG project manager for the VMT mitigation program that we're bringing to you. This was funded under a Caltrans planning grant, and we worked with the County of San Diego and also our consultant, Intersecting Metrics, to develop what we're bringing to you today. And we're hoping to get your thoughts on the frameworks we're bringing to you and also possible next steps. So I'm joined by Damon Davis and Steve Cook. So I will turn it over to Damon to introduce himself in the county and then to Steve for our presentation.
Hi, I'm Damon Davis. I'm a senior transportation planner with the County of San Diego and Planning and Development Services. And we were given direction by our board to seek out some programmatic VMT options since we were really struggling with the idea of mitigating at the project level. And through that, we were able to get a grant from Caltrans, as Kristen mentioned, and we contracted with Steve Cook with Intersecting Metrics to develop the program. So we'll hand it over to Steve.
Thank you. For those of you that were here, I think we presented kind of an initial finding of this program back in April or May of 2025. And so what we're doing today is kind of updating you, the committee on where the program went, what our kind of draft program looks like, and then seek direction on kind of our next steps. So just a quick refresher, as Kirsten mentioned before, this was funded through a Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant. It was a partnership grant between SANDAG and the county. The total grant value was $480,000, and there was $137,000 of in-kind match of staff time. And the product needs to be wrapped up by June 30th, 2026. So within a couple of months. So that's why we're presenting to you guys and kind of getting final direction before we take it to both boards to finalize the program. So just a quick reminder of where we've been with the schedule. As you can see, we're almost to the end. We've had 5 TAC meetings, which are our technical advisory committees, which was made up of transportation engineers and planners from all the jurisdictions within the region. They helped guide us through the process, as we'll show in the next slide, and kind of talk through what programs would be kind of amenable to each jurisdiction and which programs would work for each jurisdiction. And we had several different options, and they kind of guided us through that process. They've also reviewed the documents and helped us in actually drafting the plans. So the role of the regional plan. One thing that's really tough about VMT mitigation is it's really two things. One is it's a newer impact threshold within the state. And under the old system, with level of service, we had 50 years of kind of research and development and practice. So there's a lot of experts in it. But VMT, it's about 5 years old at this point as a metric. So there's not a lot of research and not a lot of resources with it. So part of this program was to kind of create a set of tools for jurisdictions to use so that they didn't have to invest the time and money into basically figuring out how to mitigate VMT and what's accurate. We also wanted to help fund local transportation infrastructure within the local jurisdictions, basically VMT reducing infrastructure. So providing another avenue for different jurisdictions to put in bus stops or transit lanes or bike lanes, things like that. We also wanted to create an organized database of VMT reducing infrastructure. One of the problems with VMT reducing infrastructure is not everybody knows what it is and how valuable it is. So if we actually created a database that actually showed what infrastructure is available to be built and what the quantified VMT reduction is with that and how much that costs, that will it would unveil a lot of the mystery around VMT mitigation. We also wanted to create a framework so that jurisdictions can look at that database in exchange. There's certain jurisdictions, more suburban jurisdictions or rural jurisdictions, they don't have as much VMT reducing opportunity or mitigation opportunity as some of the more urban jurisdictions. And the urban jurisdictions might have too much opportunity. So creating a way for the regions to kind of communicate and share those opportunities and help mitigate VMT related impacts throughout the entire region, that's kind of part of the communication that we wanted to create with this program. And then finally, we wanted to help implement the sustainable community strategy that's in the RTP. SB 375 is kind of what pulls everything together from a VMT standpoint and GHG standpoint. So this is to help really implement the region's sustainable community strategy. So I'll pause here and see if there's any questions. I should have mentioned before, this is kind of meant to be more of a conversational presentation. So feel free to interrupt me and we can have discussions as we go through. So any kind of questions at this point about what the program is or how kind of the history of it?
I'll just ask one. VMT's been around more than 5 years, so I'm trying to figure out where that 5 years came from.
Sorry, I should have been more clear. It's been an impact threshold since July 1st, 2020. That's when it came into play in CEQA. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's been around a lot longer, but that's the first time we've had to use it as the threshold for transportation related impact.
Thank you very much.
And for big projects like Caltrans roadway projects, it's increasing the cost of VMT mitigation 25, 30, even up to 40%. And so it's a big deal. And we need to figure out a way to pay for that and still be able to deliver projects.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Is there, as I understand it, when we did the VMT, we looked at vehicle miles traveled within the county, but we didn't look in terms of the region. Is there any way of changing that standard to be more regional? We see the explosion of southwestern corner of Riverside County. I can assure you they have no jobs. They're all working in my district. And yet those people are not included in that VMT. So the whole premise of this is false science. It's not real science. Because when you look only within the county, it misleads you into believing that 450,000 people don't work in San Diego County. They're coming across the border, either from Riverside or Tijuana.
Yeah, and so to answer that, the program's not necessarily looking at how VMT is being analyzed. It's more looking at how to mitigate it. But it is kind of pulling it more to a regional strategy. Right now, VMT is all localized and the mitigation of it is localized. And the hope for this program is to create more of a regional mitigation bank or a regional standard to help kind of create additional opportunities from a regional standpoint. So jurisdictions aren't limited to just the resources in which they have.
I get that's what we're doing now.
Yeah.
But it's not helpful because it's not based on science. It's based on philosophy. Is there a way of changing that premise and still move forward? Because if we did, the numbers would be woefully different than what we're seeing today. We're mitigating for something that we're not even going to touch the problem. So is there a way to make it more regional is my question. And if you don't know, or, you know, that's okay too.
Yeah, Supervisor Anderson, one thing that we did do when we established our VMT thresholds, we did try to incorporate those interregional travel. Every model has a border, and for the Sandag model, it's the Sandag region. So all the folks that live in Temecula, myself included, we're not captured in that number. So one thing that we did is we used the statewide average VMT, and we got the traffic volumes that commute down I-5, I-15, and even on I-8, and we incorporated that number into our threshold. So our threshold isn't exactly what's on the public facing Sandag model because we incorporated those interregional trips, you know, per questions that the board asked us to do.
Any other? Yes.
Sure. Maybe I'll follow up with that in particular. I think it'll be helpful to have a framework in place. I understand what Supervisor Anderson's noting, especially across county borders. But the calculation is one thing. I think on that front, having an option to mitigate is another. So from a threshold standpoint, the city of San Diego uses, I think, like 15% the regional average as our threshold. Is there going to be a different threshold that has been determined that we're looking to apply across the region?
No, the thresholds are, this program will not affect any jurisdiction's thresholds or transportation impact study guidelines. It's really just a mitigation program that allows them to, you know, jurisdictions will still determine what the VMT related impact is. This is just a tool to help them mitigate that impact if they don't have the VMT reducing capacity within their jurisdiction, or for jurisdictions that have a lot of VMT reducing capacity, it will allow them to partner with other jurisdictions to help implement that.
Okay, I guess what I mean is how we're determining that threshold from a regional standpoint. Is that looking to be standardized?
No, that's still completely up to the lead SEQA agency.
So each local agency will still have their threshold determination, whether they're within a reduction factor, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay.
Let me just reframe that because that's really important that you just mentioned. So this study, this regional VMT study, has nothing to do about what a jurisdiction considers an impact. It has nothing to do with how they determine the percentages of an impact. That's all maintained and still would be with the individual jurisdiction. What we're looking at is once a jurisdiction determines that there is impact, where do they go for mitigation? So right now, as Stephen mentioned, it was case by case, project by project. It's very small scale. There's an opportunity, just like with the EMP program on a regional level, to look at VMT and provide more opportunities for mitigation that a jurisdiction could go to. And that's what the purpose of this study was not to just identify an impact, but create an opportunity for mitigating that impact.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So, and I really appreciate Supervisor Anderson's comment. I completely agree with what you're saying. We need to make the numbers and the science work. I'm gonna go at another side of the same problem. I want to understand how you validate the amount of mitigation, VMT mitigation you get per, let's say, per 10 miles of bicycle lane. My concern is that we don't really see the mitigation. When I look in Encinitas at bicycles, the vast majority, maybe even 90–95% are recreational. Those are not mitigating anything. Those are people out exercising and go on a big loop, come back home, take a shower, and then go to work in their car. They're not commuting. There's a handful. I always look when I'm driving. First of all, I count the number of cars, and it's in the hundreds versus the number of bicycles I see, and it's in the single digits. Then of the single digit bicycles, I count the number that look like they're work commuting, and it's almost none, with the exception of kids going to school, which are very short trips. So that tells me that bicycles are mitigating short trips. And if you have 1,000 students going 1/10 of a mile or one car going to Temecula, that's the trade-off. So I'm trying to get the science in this mitigation. So how do you validate your mitigation that if I put in 10 miles of bike path, I get how do you know how many vehicle trips you're taking off the road?
So that's a good question. We'll get into that a little bit more further into the presentation, but
Okay.
what I will say is that's one of the issues that we ran into in the process. And one of the solutions that we developed is to develop a universal kind of VMT reduction calculator for the region. And one of the issues that we've experienced in the past is there are formulas that you can use, but those formulas require a lot of inputs. And those inputs can vary widely and drastically based on the location. It's kind of like what you mentioned is if they're shorter trips, so if it's in a more dense area, you have a higher opportunity for people actually riding their bike or walking. But if it's something that's out more in a rural area, it's going to be too far to do that. And based on how accurate your inputs are to those formulas, it can drastically change your VMT reduction numbers. And so what we did with this round was we actually took data from the SANDAG model, very localized data, kind of at the census tract level, to try and capture exactly what you're talking about is if it's within an area that is denser and there is a more opportunity like downtown San Diego, there's a much higher propensity for people to walk or bike if you provide the facilities where facilities that are kind of out more in suburban and rural areas may not have that opportunity. So we are trying to solve that problem and do it in a way that is accurate and easy to do for jurisdictions.
So somewhere you're going to get to how you validated the model for all these different cases, for long distance driving, for local driving, and I'm going to be very curious as we move forward with this. I've been on planning commission over a long period of time, so I got very used to LOS. We still have LOS in our general plan, so we still enforce it. But now we're doing VMT, and yeah, I'm seeing more statements of overriding consideration as the only mitigating method, the only method around it.
Right.
So,
Any other questions or comment? Please continue.
So to review the process and kind of how we got here, we started with high level options. And by the high level options for program, it's, it was kind of a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. No idea is a bad idea. So we looked at what other jurisdictions have done, looked at different theories that people maybe have not put into practice yet, but people have written papers about, and then also just kind of worked with the TAC to come up with ideas. And so we came up with, I think it was 10 to 15 ideas of different program types. We put that to a vote with the TAC. And from there, we selected 4 potential programs that we wanted to move forward for kind of a more deeper analysis. We didn't really do an analysis on those kind of first 10 to 15 alternatives, but the 4 that we selected, we did kind of a planning level analysis, looking at how effective they would be, how affordable they would be, and how applicable they would be to the different jurisdictions. We had a good set of evaluation criteria, and we gave a scoring system. We ran the 4 alternatives through that scoring system and developed a preferred alternative, which is what we'll present today. So what we came up with was a hybrid program. And by hybrid, I mean it involves 3 different program types and different levels of mitigation. And the reason why we moved forward with this is we wanted to provide jurisdictions an opportunity to have a local program, but also provide a regional program in case the VMT mitigation opportunities are imbalanced within there. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had different types of mitigation so that we could kind of lift every rock to make sure that we get every type of VMT mitigation we could to make sure we can actually mitigate our impacts. So with that, we developed VMT mitigation in lieu fee guidelines for jurisdictions so that they can implement their own in lieu fee program, their own localized one. And we also developed 2 regional programs, a credit program and exchange program, which would give jurisdictions the opportunity to both get funding for their own projects in which they want to implement, as well as post projects they want to implement to let developers within other jurisdictions to construct. So quickly, we'll go through the in lieu fee guidelines. The guidelines would provide a roadmap to develop an in lieu fee program with little to no outside assistance. That was kind of our goal with this program, is to give local jurisdictions the information and the data and the tools to develop their own in lieu fee program without hiring a consultant or seeking kind of outside advice. Through this, we provide the methods and the formulas to basically calculate the VMT mitigation rates. We provided an outline of a typical nexus study and program ordinance. We provided legal frameworks and basically a Q&A or an FAQ. And then we also provided several example studies of programs that have been developed. So with this kind of tool package, staff within jurisdictions hopefully would be able to build their own program and in a very affordable way and have confidence that it would work. Any questions on the local in lieu fee program guidelines?
I don't see any.
Okay. So quick program overview of what an in lieu fee program is there's an impacting project. It pays a fee to the local jurisdiction or the lead agency. That lead agency then uses the funds to build VMT reducing infrastructure. It's structured much like any kind of other impact fee program. It would just focus on funding and building VMT reducing infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is built, the VMT impact would be offset. So now moving on to the regional program. So the local program, as I mentioned before, that's meant to give local jurisdictions control over how much they actually charge their development community and make sure that they have kind of a first bite at the apple. If a local jurisdiction doesn't want to build their own program or wants to tier it with both a local program and a regional program, the regional options come into play. So calculating VMT reductions, and I think this is this might help answer some of your questions. And I'll pause after this one if you have additional ones. But jurisdictions would need to calculate their own VMT reductions for their proposed infrastructure. However, we would build a calculator tool that would allow jurisdictions basically the ability to calculate those the reductions for it. All they would really need, and our goal with this is to provide the location of the infrastructure, the type of infrastructure, and the length of the infrastructure. If the calculator doesn't cover basically the VMT reductions or the infrastructure in which a jurisdiction is trying to see, or they disagree with the calculator, they do have an option to perform their own calculations. The only thing that we would ask is that a traffic engineer from a peer jurisdiction review that and basically sign off on the calculations. That way we have a second set of eyes and make sure that it's kind of within a reasonable, the calculations have reasonable assumptions. So I'll stop here and see if we have any kind of questions on how the reductions would be made.
Seeing none.
Okay.
Let's continue.
So this is the infrastructure that would be included in the calculator. This isn't necessarily just the infrastructure that would be accepted by the program, but this is kind of like the catch-all, easy to calculate infrastructure. These are the kind of the most common infrastructure. So it's different types of bike facilities, different types of transit facilities, pedestrian facilities, and even getting into things like park and ride lots and potential NEV networks. So now kind of jumping into how these kind of regional programs work. So the exchange program, the implementing jurisdiction would basically identify a VMT reducing infrastructure, and they would plan out that project, and they would post it to basically the database in which the program would provide. Developers with impacted projects would then search that database to find different infrastructure projects that would meet their VMT reduction needs, and they would select those projects. From there, they would develop an MOU between the implementing jurisdiction and the lead agency, the one that they need to basically clear the CEQA impact from, to say, hey, basically, we're going to build this infrastructure. Our VMT impact is, let's say 100 miles. We're going to build this bike lane and this, we're going to improve this transit stop, and the VMT reduction associated with that would be 100 miles. Therefore, we're mitigating our impact. The developer then builds that infrastructure, and they offset their impact, which allows them to move forward with building their project. Any questions on how an exchange program would work?
Seeing none.
Okay. So infrastructure requirements. So it must be accepted through proving calculations or using the calculator that the infrastructure posted onto the database does actually reduce VMT. That's the purpose of the calculator. That's the purpose of the peer-reviewed calculations. The infrastructure must be permanent. And the reason why the infrastructure must be permanent is we don't know the life of the project in which the VMT is going to offset the impact. So if it's a building, it could last between 50 and 100 years. Therefore, we need to reduce that VMT for 50 to 100 years to stay compliant with CEQA. And then the infrastructure must be shovel ready before posting to the exchange program. And the reason why it needs to be shovel ready is because we're relying on the feasibility of this infrastructure to mitigate an impact. So before it's committed, we need to make sure that that infrastructure is feasible and that it's ready to go and it can be implemented within a time frame that basically before the occupancy of that project to make sure that there's not a gap in coverage of the impact occurring and the infrastructure not being built. Any questions on the infrastructure requirements?
Seeing none?
Okay. So the second option, the second program at the regional level is a credit program. So the way the credit program would work is a jurisdiction builds VMT reducing infrastructure and they calculate the reductions. They then post those reductions. So if you build a bike lane and let's say that bike lane reduces 50 miles per day, they post that infrastructure to a database and the database says, okay, you get 50 miles of VMT reduction credits. The jurisdiction then banks those credits and has those credits to be able to sell to different projects within the region to offset their VMT related impacts. So then the jurisdiction would sell those VMT reduction offsets to a development project to offset their impact, and they collect the funds from that. They report back to the database to say, hey, look, we sold these credits. The database maintains that and it kind of maintains the balance of everybody's credits. So really the purpose of this program is to account for the credits that have been provided and provide basically a bank of those, and then also account for if they've been used or not. Any questions on the credit program?
Nope.
Okay. So the infrastructure requirements are very similar with the credit program, but there is some additional requirements that we'll talk about because of additionality purposes. And I'll get into what that means. But once again, it must be the VMT reductions must be proven through accepted calculations. The infrastructure must be fully constructed and operational prior to receiving credits. The infrastructure must be permanent. The funding used to construct and implement the infrastructure cannot be associated with other mitigation or development requirements. And what I mean by that is if you have a localized VMT mitigation program that builds a bike lane, you collected funding for that from a localized program, you can't then turn and claim credit for that bike lane with the regional credit program because that's basically double counting the reductions. And the infrastructure must be constructed prior to the jurisdiction's participation in the credit program. And the reason why we have this requirement is, we don't want to be accepting credits for bike lanes that were built in 1989. We had to kind of create a stop point to basically say, okay, we're actually building this infrastructure as part of this credit program to receive credit for it. And then we have some additional requirements of the credit program. And this is to make sure that the improvements are additional. And so from a CEQA standpoint, mitigation needs to be what they call additional, which means it needs to basically we have to prove that it would have not occurred but for this program. And so with this, we have to make sure that the funding from this program is used to actually reduce VMT throughout the region. So funds generated through the sale of credits with the program can only be spent on other VMT reducing infrastructure. So if you basically take funding or credit funding for building a bike lane, you have to spend that funding on some other VMT reducing infrastructure. It doesn't have to be a bike lane. It could be a transit stop improvement. It could be closing a sidewalk gap or something like that. But that money kind of has to be paid forward towards funding more VMT reducing infrastructure. Participants in the program would basically need to meet the reporting requirements of the Mitigation Fee Act, which is basically providing how much funding was collected and where that funding was sent and posting that on their website. Failure to do so, and then the program administrator will actually go through and check that is actually occurring, much like the RTCIP program funds are done today, where there's basically an audit at the end of the year to make sure that the reporting, basically all of the collected funds, they're accounted for and they've been spent on VMT reducing facilities. And then finally, jurisdictions who don't follow up the reporting requirements or have not really spent their funds correctly would no longer be allowed to participate in the program. Any questions on the additional requirements?
Seeing none.
Okay. So the TAC has had a chance to review the reports, the draft reports of all these different programs, and we did receive feedback. Some of the feedback that we received was there was requesting language to make sure that transportation agencies could participate in the program, or transportation related impact projects could utilize the program to offset VMT impacts. That's something that we have gone and updated and made that very clear, that both development projects and transportation related infrastructure projects who have VMT related impacts would be able to participate in the program to offset those impacts. Some jurisdictions have expressed concerns about additionality with the credit program. That's kind of why we added that slide that we just went through with a bunch of additional requirements to make sure that the funds collected from the credit program would be spent on VMT reducing infrastructure, to make sure that those improvements are additional and are built because of the program. Jurisdictions requested further clarification on the program administrator and what role that would entail. That's some of the kind of questions that we have for this group, and something we want to discuss with our questions that we want a little bit more direction on. And then others have noted that the program in place could potentially make it difficult to approve projects with unmitigated VMT related impacts. And I believe this gets to some of the questions we had before. One of the purposes of the regional program is to help alleviate that concern of, hey, we have all these VMT related impacts, but we can't mitigate them. And that's because at the moment, there's not enough information out there and tools to basically calculate that impact, those reductions. And then also there's not enough capacity, particularly within some jurisdictions, that would allow the mitigation to take place. So really the purpose of this program is to help alleviate that. And then finally, we'll talk about AB 130. For those of you that are not familiar, AB 130 was approved by the state of California in June 2025. The bill had a lot of things in it and a lot about kind of streamlining CEQA. But one of the key aspects of that bill that affects this program, or could affect this program, is that the bill did require the state to build a statewide VMT mitigation bank. However, that mitigation bank uses affordable housing to reduce VMT and not infrastructure like this program. So there's not really overlap between the two. There wouldn't be double counting between the two, because this program does not include really any affordable housing reductions. The AB 130 will be in place by law. The AB 130 needs to start collecting funding by July 1st, 2026. And that's kind of all we really know at this point. So next steps, we are presenting to the Transportation Committee in April. It'll be basically the same presentation, and we'll also be seeking we'll have the same questions for them and be seeking some of the same input. We need to complete this assessment in June under the terms of the planning agreement. We need to then we will present to the county board and the board of supervisors in July, and then we'll continue to monitor AB 130 as it emerges, just to make sure that the two programs are compatible. So kind of like what Keith had before, we have 4 questions that we did want to kind of seek feedback from this group. So I think it was best to just kind of go one by one. So we'll start with the first one. Is there interest in implementing a regional VMT mitigation pilot program? So what it comes down to is, we have the grant takes us through basically the development of the program, kind of where we're at today. It doesn't really get into implementation of it. Those are kind of next steps. So, we have developed a program. So is there really interest in developing a pilot program? The reports basically recommend doing it for 3 years, so which would kind of correspond with the next RTP update. So it would give us a chance to implement the program, check the interest of the program, see the success of it, see how many jurisdictions decide to participate, and see if how effective it is. So I guess that's our first question to the committee.
Councilmember Lee?
Sure, I'll chime in just to start. And before even answering that question, going back to the slide where you talked about avoiding double counting, basically in terms of funding used for infrastructure projects. Is that specifically double counting that you're thinking of from a mitigation standpoint? Like, for example, if San Diego has our own VMT mitigation measures in place, and so is it avoiding that double counting, or is there, if local jurisdictions have requirements for certain infrastructure that goes along with the project, that is not necessarily meant as a VMT mitigation factor? How does that get applied?
It's both. So, and that's why we're requiring. So first off, the first requirement that we basically need to check the financials of the implementation is to make sure that, that it's basically not being built from funds of, for instance, the City of San Diego's Active Transportation and Luffy program. That's a mitigation program that the City of San Diego has that implements multimodal facilities. So projects that were built through the ATILF would not be able to get credit for them. And the reason for that is, we'd be double counting it. Additionally, let's say the project is a frontage improvement to a development. That requirement's in place already, so we can't claim the credit for the VMT reduction associated with it because it wasn't built for VMT mitigation. And so that's part of the reason why it's like if it's a frontage improvement or basically a condition of approval, we can't take credit for that either because it would happen without this program.
Got it. That was actually where I was getting at, was primarily with frontage improvements as an example. My perspective is that there certainly is no reason not to implement a program. I think to me, the benefit here is the opportunity for projects, as you had mentioned, that currently are simply just not feasible because they have no opportunity to mitigate VMT, or that are very difficult to pencil out as a result of it. And the flexibility of another option certainly is helpful on that front.
I just want to clarify that we don't have enough information right now to just jump in to implement a program because we need to understand what the costs are and who would administer the program. Right now, we don't have funding to establish a program. So if the RPC and TC gives us direction to continue to explore this and analyze this, the next step then would be to understand how it would be administered and what the cost to the agency would be to administer it.
Yeah, I think I was just looking to answer the question of there's interest, I guess. So on my end, at least.
Did anybody else want to make a comment or question? Yes, Mayor.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the question of the understanding how AB 130 and any future SANDAG program would interact. In other words, project developer comes to one of the jurisdiction, wants to build something, they have to mitigate VMT to meet CEQA. Would the AB 130 mitigate it or the SANDAG? And either one could do it, so that it's only single counting?
Correct. So what they would look at, what I would imagine would happen in that case is the developer would look and see which program that they would want to participate in or which program they'd have opportunity. What jurisdictions, and we do recommend this in the guidelines, that jurisdictions kind of head that off at the pass a little bit and create policies saying, you need to participate in this program. You need to participate in the localized program. If there's not capacity there, then you can go to the regional program. If there's not capacity there, you need to go then you can go to the state program, or you can kind of create a blended balance. So it's like you can reduce 30% of your mitigation through local, 30% through regional, and 30% through the state or something like that.
Okay, what my concern is that developers will start shopping to the lowest,
yes,
the most easiest project. If it turns out that they get the most VMT mitigation for the same dollar, they're gonna go. My guess is to that one, probably the state. If I have to guess.
And jurisdictions can also choose to participate in the regional program. So if you have like a regional exchange program and you post VMT reducing infrastructure on that, you can require your developments to exhaust your list of improvements in the regional program before they can move to an outside jurisdiction as well. So the two regional programs can be used as kind of both local and regional programs in there. Both local and regional programs in their own.
So earlier you talked about the VMT calculator and that we would be able to define the parameters in that calculator, so to speak. For the mitigation program you're envisioning, are you thinking that the local jurisdiction would be able to set parameters, thresholds in that too? So it'd be flexible, even though it's a regional level of mitigation program, it could have local jurisdiction parameters plugged into it.
Yeah, the regional programs are just a tool. There's no requirements. There's no requirement to participate. There's no requirement to use it however you want. It's strictly meant as a tool for the local jurisdictions to use to help mitigate VMT related impacts. Everything else, all your standards, all your mitigation requirements, that's still completely up to the lead agency.
But it's a tool, but does that tool have a dial on it so that for bicycle paths, we could require a certain mitigation level, and for public transportation subsidies, we can do something different, in other words, or is it a one size fits all that mitigation in North County jurisdictions have to have the same parameters in the tool that are in downtown San Diego?
So the tool basically is location specific. So what the tool will do is it will pull information from the Sandag model. So information such as like trip length, typical trip length within the census tract area. So like a neighborhood, what is the typical auto trip length of a vehicle within this neighborhood? What is the typical trip length of a bike trip within this neighborhood? So it gets down to that level of detail to make sure that the analysis and the mitigation reductions are accurate down to like the neighborhood level instead of doing it region wide.
The effectivity of the mitigation, so that I understand the VMT measurement portion, but the mitigation derived from putting in infrastructure, there's a certain effectiveness of that. Would that be also tailored? Would it be set by Sandag, or would it be set by the local jurisdiction for the mitigation in the local jurisdiction?
Got it. So the calculator would be set by Sandag, but local jurisdictions do have a choice to do their own calculations and submit those as well. You're not required to use the calculator. It's just something that will provide an easier path to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so the second question is, should Sandag and the county pursue funding for the pilot program? This is kind of what I think the question before was asked.
I was just asked, did we get a consensus as number one? So let's go back to that before we move on. We don't have to make any decisions. They wanted our thoughts on it. Is there anybody that objects to implementing a regional VMT mitigating pilot program? Because the question is there interest? I'm always interested in seeing what options are there. I don't know why you wouldn't want to give yourselves that option, but does anybody disagree with that? Okay, I think we got our answer for that one. I'm sorry. Now, number two, should Sandag and the county pursue funding for a pilot program?
If the answer to one is yes, then the answer to two is yes.
I was just going to ask you, what's the difference?
That's why I wanted
Okay.
number one answer.
Yes.
Number two's.
Number two makes perfect sense.
Okay. So then the third question is, we don't have to move forward with all three programs at once. We can start smaller. The exchange program is probably the easiest to implement. And so do we want to move forward with both pilot programs at the same time, or do we want to move forward with just one, and which one would we want to move forward as a pilot program?
I'll start off the dialogue on that one. My city doesn't have a great deal of land that we could put forth into an exchange program, but we have times we'll need it. So I would like to try and look at both, but if we can only do one at a time because of resources or whatever, what are your thoughts? What would be most useful to your jurisdictions?
For us, it would be an exchange.
It would be exchange. Would that be true for everybody? Exchange would be the most usable? I'm not seeing, well, let me ask you then. If we would say to look at both, is that going to be detrimental to going forward with either of them?
No, it would just require more funding. So, because if you have two programs, you'd have to fund both of them and they'd have separate costs. So it would be basically double the effort, or actually I think the credit program's a little bit more expensive because there's a little bit more administration involved in it.
Well, maybe then we should, I would like to say we look at both, but given that's the case, if we have a preference for one over the other, we should at least let that be known. I'm sensing exchange seems to be the one most useful, but if not, please somebody speak up.
I'll chime in. I think of the two programs, I don't foresee exchange being used as much as the credit program, providing a little more flexibility. Since the exchange program would really require that agencies are working directly with each other as opposed to interacting regionally.
Even with the credit program, jurisdictions would have to still work together, because if a developer is buying credits from Poway, they'd have to, and the developments in Encinitas or, Escondido would have to accept the credits from there. Like basically they'd have to participate in the program and be okay with using those credits as mitigation. So both would require interaction between the two jurisdictions.
So then we would have to do both at the same time. I mean, we couldn't do credit if we don't have exchange, you're saying.
No. So
No?
exchange, so both programs require interaction between the jurisdictions. So a credit program, if someone builds, let's say Santee builds a bike lane and they get credit for it, a developer in El Cajon wants to use those credits. El Cajon would have to be part of the program and basically accept, yes, those credits are valid in El Cajon. We believe in the program. We think that this is valid. This does offset the mitigation. With an exchange program, same thing would happen. It would just happen a little bit in reverse. If it was a developer in El Cajon, Santee posted a bike lane, they would basically, the developer in El Cajon would say, hey, we'll build this bike lane to offset our impacts. El Cajon has to accept that as mitigation.
But what you're telling me is that the city, whoever it is who's developing them, would decide on their own. So their city council would have to accept this as valid.
Yes.
So what does Sandag have to do for that?
Nothing. Sandag or whoever, the last question of whoever administers the program, they're just acting as a communication device. So they would be the one basically posting, they'd be the central hub to post the improvements so that developers in different jurisdictions could actually look and see what the opportunities are to build VMT reducing facilities.
Then I'll go back to my question. At this point, if we don't have an exchange program administered by Sandag, then the cities aren't going to do it. There's nobody to help facilitate it unless they have one-on-one quid pro quo kind of things. Is that what you're telling me?
There are a couple options. It could be administered by a third party like Circulate San Diego or another nonprofit, just a completely unbiased group, or it could be administered by a jurisdiction.
Okay, let me just then ask, what is your recommendation? Do we try and go for both or do we do one or the other? Because I'm not getting answers that lead me to either options.
I'm incredibly biased because I developed the program, so I think both have a ton of merit. I do think either Sandag or the county, because they are regional agencies and their boards do cover the entire region, are the most appropriate to administer it. But that's my opinion.
Okay, I'm agreeing with you right now for the purpose of this discussion that Sandag should be doing it. My question is, doing one credit or doing exchange or doing both? That's what we've been asked to give you input
Or
on.
let me ask this, so might it decide on funding available? If you don't get
Yes.
enough funding, then we might need to choose one.
Correct.
Okay, and my second question is, do all cities have the option for this pilot? Or are you going to limit it to certain?
It would be open to all cities. The purpose of the pilot is to basically evaluate it for 3 years. And after that 3-year time period, look and see did it work? Do we need to make changes? What is the funding requirement to maintain it? And then seek permanent funding after that.
Please, Supervisor Anderson.
Why don't we move forward? This is a suggestion with both. And as we see how much we have in our pocketbook, make a decision. We're trying to get the cart before the horse. If there's funding for both, we're arguing over nothing.
I like that. Do we have an agreement that that's the way to go? Okay.
And again, the next step is not jumping into implementation. It's really doing the analysis to understand the cost to administer a program. So if the body feels like Sandag's the right body, then we can move forward with that analysis of what it would take here at Sandag, and then come back with the information and let you all make a decision on whether or not you think it's got a good return on investment and something worth pursuing funding for.
And almost have to set up both. I mean, you're essentially setting up a marketplace, right? And if nobody comes and buys, then the pilot will fail. And so, I'll wait. I have my thoughts, and I think it's going to be hard to make that marketplace work properly.
And
Locals are going to want to do local.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that need to be evaluated, even from a short and long-term perspective. Long-term perspective, it would be naive to not mention that there's a lot of buzz on changing legislation on VMT. So that's also going on, right? So do we want to run into something that may change in the future? We do not know, right? So there is a lot of conversations about it. We have engaged on SB 375, which is not actually the VMT, but there is a lot of work in Sacramento to open up SB 743.
There's at least one bill that we know that Transportation California is sponsoring, and that will change Senate Bill 743 if it's successful.
I think we could bring it with GR team later.
Yeah, we
on.
can probably come back with a legislative update on that.
Okay, I think you've got the answers that we gave. Okay. Okay, the next question, did we finish all these?
I think you covered it already.
Okay, I thought so
yep.
without. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. That was a great discussion.
We need to-
Oh, that's right. We have to go to public comment. I'm sorry. Francesca, do we have anybody that wants to speak on this item?
Thank you. Yes, Cesar Javier will be first. If you're online and would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand now.
Congratulations. You are the chair, board supervisor, Purita. I am the mayor of the city of San Diego. Oh, we're just playing from Hollywood's script. Sandag is selling pharmaceutical tablets to mitigate environmental pollution in general. Good product like Argis, like BMT. How about hospital, mortuary, cemetery program, Sandag? Can we not adopt herbal, natural cure instead of this expensive tablets? What else did we write here? My God, help us. They are monitoring the lowest form of animals, the beast and the insect. What about Purita and Javier? Can you not monitor us, BMT proponents? We are mitigating environmental pollution. My God, I hope we are not threatening you, but the book says here, many of San Diegans are dying from cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, any kind of cancer. Come on, Sandag. This is an association of philosophers. Can we not focus on saving the lives of San Diegans? Direct to the point. What is a home when no one is there? What is the nice bullet train when no passenger is there? Come on, please. God help. We are here, not to threaten you.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Did anybody from the dais have any more comments before we move to the next item? No? Okay. Did we provide all the feedback you needed under item 4? Okay, on to item number 5. Tori, and I apologize if I'm going to say this wrong. Alad, awesome. And Goldie Hebron will present a comprehensive overview of the Sandag grant programs and recent program assessments.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the Regional Planning Committee. Again, I'm Tuere Faola. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustainable Communities within our Regional Planning Department, and I have here with me today Goldie Hebron, who is a Senior Grants Analyst, and we're here to talk to you and give you an overview of our grants programs. There are a lot of them that Sandag administers, and so you may not be aware of all that we do when it comes to distributing funding throughout the region and the administration of that. We're also going to talk with you a little bit about kind of your responsibility as a committee when we are putting those grants out, where your input makes the most difference. And one of the things that we want to kind of cover in today's presentation is to talk to you about is that you're going to be seeing a lot more of me, hearing a lot more from Antoinette, our Senior Planning Director, when it comes to talking about Sandag's grants programs. We made a change over the last 6 or 7 months when we have been doing kind of functional assessments throughout the agency that Mario has been leading and asking us to really take a look and understand, are the programs within our different departments in the right place, being managed by the right people, and really maximizing opportunities for us to collaborate. So we moved our grants distribution and administration activities into regional planning. And really, this allows us, we were already collaborating a lot as we develop the programs, but this allows us for much more seamless collaboration. And it also, when we look at some of the grant programs and you hear about them today, these are often some of the implementation tools that we have when it comes to our regional plan, as well as when it comes to our short range transit planning for our coordinated plan. So Goldie's going to talk about a couple of those grant programs and the schedule, and then I'll talk about some of the changes that we are looking at as we've merged our groups together.
Thank you so much, Tori. Again, my name is Goldie Herbon and I'm on the grants team here at SANDAG. SANDAG has 9 grant programs that we distribute funding to throughout our region. Being animated up on the slide right now are 4 grant programs that are funded solely through the Transnet ordinance. On the left side, we have the Smart Growth Incentive Program, or SGIP for short, and the Active Transportation Grant Program. These programs provide funding to our local cities and the County of San Diego to support transportation investments that create more compact, bikeable, walkable, sustainable communities. And since 2009, these 2 programs have awarded over $140 million to close to 200 projects. On the top right, we have the Environmental Mitigation Program Land Management Grant, which you heard about earlier in this agenda. This grant program provides funding to nonprofits, local jurisdictions, and other governmental land management agencies to help maintain and enhance native habitats in regional habitat preserves and protect endangered species. There have been 10 cycles of this grant program, and $18.8 million has been awarded across 136 projects. And lastly, the final Transnet grant program is a senior mini grant program, or SMG for short, that provides funding to local governments, nonprofits, and healthcare providers to support specialized transportation services for older adults. Over 27 million has been awarded throughout 9 cycles, and 97 projects have been funded throughout the region. The other 5 grant programs that we administer are non-Transnet grant programs. They're funded by the state or the federal government. The first project or program I want to highlight is the Access for All, or AFA grant program. That's a state-funded transportation program that primarily serves individuals with disabilities. The program provides on-demand wheelchair accessible vehicle transportation throughout the region. There's been 2 cycles and we've released close to $5 million, 1 project per cycle. Similarly, the Section 5310 program, which is funded through the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, provides transportation services for older adults or individuals with disabilities. Both services of these 2 programs provide critical transportations to help individuals reach key destinations like medical appointments, grocery stores, and community centers. So in the top middle, we have the Regional Active Transportation Program, or ATP, that provides federal and state dollars to local public agencies that promote active modes of transportation like walking and biking. 7 cycles of the regional ATP program have been implemented, with awards of over $145 million to 42 projects. And then in the bottom row, we have grant programs that are newer to us. The first one is the Housing Acceleration Program, or HAP for short. This program takes state funding and applies them to local jurisdictions to fund planning and capital projects that are related to accelerating housing production. And then lastly, our newest program is the Flex Fleet Grant Program, or FFGP, which will provide federal funding to support transportation services that expand shared mobility, travel choices, and enhance transit connections to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. This program was approved by the board recently on February 27th to release a call for projects, and that call will release $4.5 million. Before I move on, are there any questions about the grant programs that SANDAG administers?
Just the last one, the FFGP, what is the cutoff for applications for that program?
Once the call for projects is released, applicants have 90 days to apply. We anticipate a call for projects to be released in the coming weeks.
Thank you. That's what I was.
Of course. Any other questions?
Any other questions from the board? Nope.
Great. So Sandag uses a call for projects process to distribute grant funding. The overall process and the key steps in this process are shown on the slide. The RPC is involved in two main steps, which I'll underscore on the slide. It's step 1 and step 5. So first is the call for projects development. This is where the program's eligibility, objectives, goals, and the scoring evaluation criteria are brought to you all for discussion. And changes that you propose are considered for incorporation into the draft call for projects. This is a most critical step in the process and where you can shape and modify the call for projects guidelines to achieve your committee's goals, your jurisdiction's goals, the region's goals.
We will ask Goldie, I want to just jump in here. So you saw that there's sort of two buckets of grant programs that we manage at Sandag Transnet, and that's where you have the most flexibility. The other grant programs are state and federally funded, and we don't have as much flexibility with there's some criteria that we can tinker with. You can, but in general, like we have to pass through the guidelines from the funding agency.
Along with that, when you're done with this slide, if you could go back to that slide that listed all the different types and just tell off the top which ones we have the flexibility on.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead and go back to the last slide.
Yeah, Doris.
So these are all other people's money. That's not Sandag programs. The first slide is Sandag program. So Smart Growth, the EMP, the Regional Active Transportation Grant Program. We give out 2 active transportation grants. There's the state, and then there's the Transnet. And then the senior mini grant. So these you have a little bit more flexibility with. The next slide is the state and federally funded programs, and we have less ability to influence the criteria. So I know there was a lot of concern that flexible fleets, we can only fund pilot projects. That's because we don't have a funding source that allows us to do ongoing operations. And so for flexible fleet pilots, it's not our decision, it's the Fed's decision.
So on a question like that, NCTD is also asking for some of these grants. So
Yep.
is Sandag competing with them?
They're going to apply to us for the grant. So it's our money and they're going to apply to us to get funding for those.
Jurisdictions can as well?
Yes. So flexible fleets is open to jurisdictions, operators, military, and tribes.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Okay, so going back to call for projects, we will bring draft call for projects to you all from the first slide of those types of programs or the ones that are under RPC purview. And we will also incorporate any changes that you present. And then we bring a final call for projects for your review, approval, and recommendation to the board. And I just want to underscore that once the call for projects is approved by the board, we cannot amend the call for projects after that, right? It goes through all of the policy advisory committees and the board. So then we are unable to change at that point. So after a call for projects is approved by the board, we issue the call for projects, and then that initiates a 90-day application windows for applicants to submit their projects. That's in step 2. And then step 3 is application evaluation. So after we received all our applications, we go through a scoring process, both internal and external, to score the applications and rank them or prioritize them in the order as set out in the call for projects and recommend a bundle of projects for award, which is step 4. So then finally on to step 5, RPC is asked to approve the projects that are recommended for funding, and we ask for your recommendation to the board. And then finally in step 6 is project or award implementation. So during project implementation, grant staff will provide RPC with a status of grant projects during quarterly updates. I'll provide you one at the end of this presentation. And RPC is also asked to consider amendments to grant projects for grant programs that are under your purview. And the most recent quarterly update is in attachment 1 of this item. So now I'm going to turn it over back over to Tori to discuss grant program work plan.
Okay, so just shifting a little bit in terms of talking about like Goldie gave a great overview of what our grants are, kind of the process that we take. But when we moved grants into planning, one of the first things we wanted to do is see, well, where are there opportunities for us to, bring improvements on how we administer these programs. We also, as we had done some of our more recent calls, really identified some areas where we could have improvements. And so we've gone through the process of really sitting down with staff and really talking through where there are risks within the program, where there are opportunities for improvement, where do we have funding that we are lacking. And so we put together a work program and have identified some of the high priority action items of that we wanted to present to this committee today and to have discussion, talk about, also ask if you think these are the right things or if there are other things that you think we should be focusing on as we're diving into the grants program now being in the regional planning department. So I'm just going to
really quickly. So we know from an administration standpoint where we need to approve, but you're all on the other end as grant recipients. So we'd really like feedback from you as you go through the application process or as you're working with us on implementing your projects. Are there areas where we can improve?
Yep. And so that gets to our first bullet point here on the high priority action items. So when we have gone through some of our more recent ones, and the Smart Growth Incentive Program was one of those most recent call for projects that we put forward, we really identified some opportunities for implementing process improvements. And those process improvements are really everything from when you're submitting the applications where we can reduce the redundancy in areas where you're inputting information to help reduce error, where we could maybe streamline through automation and not have so much manual entry. Also where we could make sure that we are less reliant on spreadsheets where we can have errors and more reliant on using automation in that. So we're looking at all of those type of process improvements, and we are interested in hearing more from you and your jurisdictions on ways that we can improve that. Another aspect that we're really prioritizing in our work program is taking all of those process improvements when we're doing, quality control and quality assurance and documenting that in what we have as our standard operating procedures. So the grants program does have a standard operating procedures, as many different departments throughout SANDAG do, that really document the steps that we should be taking. So the steps 1 through 6 that Goldie went through are in there, as well as many, many other things that we have to do when we're putting together call for projects, as well as when we're administering and monitoring our grants and meeting those federal and state requirements, including Transnet. And so we want to make sure that we're updating that with all of that information. The other bigger benefit with merging our grants administration and distribution into regional planning is it gives us additional people that can help out our grants program. The 9 programs that Goldie mentioned, there's 4 people who are on our grants team. That's a lot of work. And so bringing them over into regional planning allows for us to augment staff, and then having that accurate and updated standard operating procedures allows those staff who are augmenting that work to have a streamlined process that they're able to follow. The other thing that was mentioned, I think, and from your prior presentations related to the EMP to we've talked about from flexible fleets, we want to evaluate strategic partnerships. One of the things that has been mentioned throughout today's presentations is the lack of funding. And so we are looking at opportunities for how we could make strategic partnerships, looking at philanthropic organizations or other organizations, nonprofits that might be able to leverage some of their funding with ours to increase the funding availability to our different grant programs, also leveraging opportunities where they may be able to help us in administering those programs and being able to meet some of the different requirements that we have. We already have a successful example of doing this with our housing acceleration program. We pass through much of those funds to you as our local jurisdictions, but we also did a housing trust fund with a nonprofit who is administering it, leveraging it for philanthropic money and providing those funds to affordable housing developers throughout the region. So that's one example of where we've done that. We want to look at future opportunities to expand and do that more throughout our grant programs. And then as Antoinette mentioned, not all of the grant programs we have, and as you saw on the slide, are local. Some of them are federal and state, and they come with a whole slew of different requirements. And so we really need to understand the risk and really manage that risk from both, we work a lot with nonprofits as well as our cities, but different organizations who we give these grants out to. And so developing a risk management framework using data that we already have in areas where we know there's risk, looking at best practices and how other people are administering similar programs is something that we're hoping to develop and document. And then something that we're also really hoping to dive more into throughout this year is our specialized transportation grant program. That is funded by both Transnet Senior Mini Grant as well as the FTA 5310, Section 5310 that Goldie mentioned to provide those services. We want to assess that program from a risk perspective because that program actually doesn't just provide funding for the services and the operating, but it also provides funding for us to purchase vehicles. And so there's over 100 100 vehicles that Sandag is the title holder and lien holder on. And so there is risk inherently built into that. And so we're going to be working with some of our other policy advisory committees who are overseeing those programs to really talk about how we can minimize our risk and maybe shift responsibility of some of that ownership or just restructure the program. And then we also really want to make sure that we're aligning it with our recently approved 2025 coordinated plan that was approved this past December and making sure that those programs are in alignment with what was proposed in that. So those are just some of the high level things that we're looking at. High priority. At the end of the presentation, we're happy to take some more comment feedback from you or answer questions. Boldy's going to walk you through our quarterly update before we do that.
Great, thank you so much. So one way the grants team keeps you informed about grants programs outside of the call for projects is a quarterly status update. And this is in reference directly to attachment 1, which you can reference as I present the next couple of slides. So this update gives you a snapshot of the programs and how they're performing and highlight completed projects. And we also flag projects that are on the watch list. And we speak to any concerns about project implementation. So we also bring you in quarterly status updates amendments to the grant projects that are within your purview as well, if they are outside staff's authority. And that typically means if a grant project needs an extension beyond 12 months, so we'll bring it to you for consideration and approval. So again, this update is in attachment 1 of the 9 grant programs that we administer. This report is on 3 of those grant programs that RPC covers, which is EMP, the Housing Acceleration Program or HAP program, and the Smart Growth Incentive Program. So the reporting period is for the quarter between October 1st and December 31st, 2025. We had 27 active projects between those 3 programs. 8 were in the EMP program, 15 are in the Housing Acceleration Program, and 4 projects are active in the Smart Growth Incentive Program. In attachment 1, you can find details on the budget expended and remaining for each of those 3 grant programs. So I'm happy to report that there were 2 projects completed during this reporting period, and they were both in the Smart Growth Incentive Program. The first one was the City of Escondido's General Plan Amendments and Environmental Review, which resulted in updates to their general plan's safety elements, and they also created a new environmental justice element. And the second project that was completed during the reporting period was the City of San Diego's Mid-City Communities Smart Growth Study Areas projects, which I'll spotlight in an upcoming slide. 2 projects were on the watch list, and they were on the watch list for the same reason. They are facing potential labor compliance violations and are under investigation with the Department of Industrial Relations. The projects will remain on the watch list until that investigation is closed out by the DIR, and both projects have already completed construction. So once the DIR approves them or is done with their investigation, then we move forward with closing out the project and releasing the retention that we retained on the project. And then lastly, there were 6 Housing Acceleration Program amendments that were executed during the reporting period. These amendments were executed because the granting agency, HCD, or the California Housing Commission, allowed for an expenditure deadline extension, and our grantees took advantage of that extension, so they increased their schedules by 5 months. So we executed those 6 agreements during this reporting period. So just a quick project showcase. There is a Smart Growth Incentive Program project that was recently completed by the City of San Diego. It's called the Mid-City Communities Smart Growth Study Areas. This project was awarded $500,000. It was a planning project, which included a public outreach program and recommendations on opportunities for growth in transit supportive densities, combined with corridor enhancements. The Smart Growth Study serves as a critical first step toward developing a land use plan to support healthier and more sustainable communities within the City of San Diego listed on the slide. Those smaller photos are the communities that were that benefit from this project. And so now I just want to turn it over to open up the floor for discussion, but I'll let Taweri lead that.
Yeah, we just put some questions up here for consideration. I don't think we need to go through these one by one. We've talked about them a little bit, but we want to make sure that we were clear and ask if you have any questions when it comes to RPC's role when we're releasing the call for projects or the different steps when we're going through preparing and releasing and administering the different grants that this committee is responsible for. And if you have any thoughts on the high level high priority action plan that we put together. We certainly value and want to hear your feedback on the experience with different grants, what you'd like us to focus on a little bit more. And just also, we understand that it's been a while since we've come and have given a thorough update and overview of what our grants programs are. So if there's anything within the grants program that you would like us to come back and provide a little bit more of a deeper dive or explain to you how that grant program is funded, administered, or the types of projects within that, we would love to know that so we can plan to come back and have those discussions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Did anybody on the committee want to pose questions, or at this point, just questions? We'll take public comment and then we'll come back for our comments. Any questions? Nope. Okay, then Francesca, do we have any public comments at this time?
Thank you, Chair. We have one public comment, Cesar Javier.
Restless and lifetime learner. Excited because we are on to the Omega City, meaning to the grave. And ours is a will and testament, praying that our successors would do the right thing. Purita, can we court Sandag? Can you talk to the leadership? Use your beauty and intelligence and persuade to give us money, one colored money, not the colored dollar, sir. Mario, you said that there are so many colors of money. Forgive me. Because there are thousands and thousands patriotic District 8 residents, Councilor Lee, ready to do the manual labor for the cleanup, physical cleanup of the Tijuana River Valley pollution. We need this money now and ready, right there, because they trust Sandag. How is that? We need green incinerators. We need portable treatment plants. We need, what do you call that, moving platform for landfill? Mobile landfill, away from the, where are the Santi representative? Santi people, you are in danger because of that Sycamore landfill. What else? Oh, special wheelbarrows, special buckets, special masks, and other equipment in order to clean that mess sanitarily without impacting.
Thank you. Your time has expired. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Does anybody from the dais want to give some input into the questions being asked in the grant program?
I was just going to say, thank you for the presentation. I think for me to answer this more completely, I would need to talk to staff. But things that I have heard is that it's very time consuming for staff, time wise, especially for small cities with small staff. So anything you can do to help, auto populate and get as much of the paperwork done would be helpful. So that was my first comment. My second comment was, do you see issues with the 90-day deadline for applications? And have you thought about extending that for another 30 days?
I have not seen an issue with 90 days. It seems to be plenty of time.
Okay, great.
I've never had anyone ask for, we don't allow extensions. There's
Right.
been, it's a hard deadline.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But this is also one of the funding programs that has a deadline. So we want to make sure that you have as much time as possible to actually implement and monitor the projects. So that's why the 90 days, we'd like to stick to it. Of course, we can entertain requests if people are really challenged with that.
I have one, and you mentioned it earlier, I think it was very helpful to figure out which programs are something Sandag can control and ones that aren't. But the big one that's come up by a lot of people, and you kind of touched on it, was whether the program will allow for continuing programs or it has to be a new program. Because everybody in the region is trying to figure out what to do about the circuit type cars or whatever they are. So if it can't be done with the program that we all thought it could be done under, my advice would be, can we find some, figure out how people, because the cities are all asking, what do we do? Because most of us tried to do it. Some of us did it with our own money to begin with, and now we're screwed because we didn't take the money when it could have been to start a program because there wasn't any money to be had. So I'm just putting that out there, that that's a little frustrating.
And I think this is a challenge with operations across the board. The transit operators are facing a fiscal cliff. There's not enough money to operate those services. Flexible fleets are the same thing. Sandag doesn't have operating money because we're not an operating agency. So that's why this grant can only be used for pilot projects. However, the feds did agree that a pilot project is considered a new pilot project if the service area was slightly modified, maybe a new technology was introduced, a new service type was introduced. So there's a little bit more flexibility than we initially thought with how we're defining pilot projects. So that should open up the door a little bit more.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Did anybody else have, oh, yes.
Well, I wanted to mirror Mayor Martinez's comments. Whereas Lemon Grove is a small city, we don't have anyone on staff to apply for these grants. So it is our city manager who's been doing this for the most part. And we don't have an assistant city manager, which is something we want to change in the near future. And we're talking about adding someone who does have grants writing experience. So I just, oh, and thank you for including Lemon Grove, our Smart Growth Incentive Project in one of your slides. That was nice to see. Yes, so Mike, what I've heard from staff is that, you know, it's just difficult for cities that have a really small staff to compete for some of this grant money. So please be patient with us. Thank you.
We're really looking at how we can streamline the application process. We actually did a workshop with peer agencies to learn about how they handle their grants, call for applications, evaluation criteria. And we saw that there was a lot of opportunity for us to kind of scale back some things to make the application process easier. We have, you know, more evaluation criteria than most, and that it just adds to the reporting that you all have to do. So we hear you loud and clear, and we're
Yeah,
going to be making some improvements
And
there.
we as council members, I'm the only council member in Lemon Grove who's retired. And so most of our council members have full-time jobs. We don't have staff. So it's even hard for us as council members to follow up with our staff, and you know, we only have so much time. So anyway, I appreciate your comments.
Less time on process, more time on implementation. That's the goal.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll tell you, Coronado has a grant program of our own. We give out over $1 million every year to nonprofits in our town to do things for us. And we have revamped that thing 5 times the last 20 years. I've been responsible for 3 of them, trying to streamline it, and we're still not done. So I do understand it actually, because so many things are required. It is difficult, but one of the things I'll just as a suggestion, I laughed because I'm the only person on the council that's been there more than a minute. We're back to where we started from, that you're allowed now, instead of having to redo everything, we're allowing people to say, okay, this is what we did last year, and you only have to update things that change. That helps with the data input. Otherwise, it's hard to get them to finish.
I think we might end up there too, because we've added so many things to the programs over the years. And now we're saying, why did we do this to ourselves and to our member agencies? So.
Well, good luck. Thank you very much for trying to streamline it. Okay. And did you get all the direction you needed on that? Okay, all right. All right, then we're going to move on to our last report is a legislative status update provided by Ryan Williams and Stacy Cooper.
Good morning. Okay, so Ryan Williams, Manager of Government Relations, and Stacy Cooper is going to join me in this presentation. Today's item is a follow-up to our January 30th conversation. At that time, we considered the annual legislative program and had conversation about the housing elements within that program. Since we spoke in January, the Executive Committee has advanced the legislative program with a recommendation to the full board for adoption. And the committee's feedback was very helpful in developing specifically our housing element of that. So we thank you for that input. We have 3 topics we're going to cover today: SB 79 implementation and cleanup efforts, which Stacy will cover for us; SB 375 reform efforts; and recently introduced housing legislation of interest related to some of the goals in the board's July letter from last year related to housing priorities, as well as the legislative program discussion from January. So we'll be mindful of time, move through this so that we can get to some discussion, but I'll kick it over to Stacy to start us off.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So as a reminder, SB 79 is a Scott Wiener bill that passed last fall. It upzones around transit on site zone for residential, commercial, or mixed use. It defines tier 1 or tier 2 TOD stops based on type and frequency of service. It goes into effect July 1st, 2026 for cities, and at the start of the 7th RHNA cycle for unincorporated areas. So in terms of implementation, legislation requires SANDAG to create a map of TOD zones and stops within the region by tier. With the approaching effective date for cities, we've been working on a draft map and have been engaging with staff at the impacted locations. At these meetings, we've been talking about bill interpretation and showing a preliminary map. Just as a note, most of the cities we've talked to have already been starting working on their own maps. While the options are limited, the bill allows cities to pass ordinances to exempt certain sites or create a TOD alternative plan to move density within and between zones. And since these need to be adopted by council and reviewed by HCD, we're all working on a tight timeframe. Again, that's July 1st. So through our Housing Acceleration Program technical assistance, which is funded through REAP 2.0, we are able to provide some support to the cities if they want to adopt ordinances or create a TOD alternative plan. We've also been discussing with staff on how we can coordinate lobbying efforts as cleanup language is being introduced. So on to those cleanup efforts. So Wiener introduced SB 677 earlier this year, which would have changed how commuter rail is calculated for SB 79 purposes. We've confirmed that SB 677 has been shelved and that all SB 79 related changes will be consolidated into SB 908. So SB 908 is currently an intent-only bill with no substantive text yet. The authors indicated it will serve as a comprehensive cleanup legislation for SB 79. Amendments are expected any day now, mid-March. Staff is engaging with the author's office, regional partners, and statewide coalitions. Ideas that we're currently floating around in terms of lobbying efforts are delaying the effective date to allow time for mapping and local planning, limiting initial applicability to the Bay Area jurisdictions as a pilot program before statewide expansion, and creating exemptions for cities below 35,000 residents. So we don't have a formal position yet, as there's no bill language, but we're engaging early to help shape those amendments for the San Diego region. And I will pass it. And does anyone have any questions before I pass it back to Ryan?
Okay, so we will jump over now to discussion of 375 reform. Last Friday, the executive committee approved, we already did, thank you. Approved a sponsor position, meaning that SANDAG will actively help to advance this bill. Our team and leadership have been in Sacramento over the past year, and even before that, sort of laying the groundwork and talking with stakeholders from throughout the state on reform efforts. So our support for this bill is very much in line with that work. The full board will consider the recommendation of a sponsor position on March 27th. As the bill is drafted, bill number is 1087, and it's introduced by Senator Cabaldon. The bill will do 2 things primarily. First, it would require a sustainable community strategy in every second regional transportation cycle as opposed to every cycle. And secondly, it would reform SB1 local planning grants to use a population-based formula rather than competitive grants. The SCS process is enormously resource intensive, as has been discussed in this committee in the past. Not every 4-year RTP cycle warrants a full revision, and particularly when conditions haven't materially changed. Shifting to an every other cycle requirement frees SANDAG and member jurisdictions to focus on project and program delivery between updates while maintaining those core greenhouse gas reduction framework. The population-based SB1 grant formula may also help smaller member jurisdictions that historically struggled to compete for discretionary planning grants. We'll continue tracking other opportunities to advance regional flexibility while preserving environmental and housing production related to SB 375 and continue the dialogue going with this board. So last, I wanted to run through a few pieces of legislation that have been introduced this year. The deadline for introduction was February 20th. And so we're going through the full slate of bills introduced and sort of picking out those that we think relate to some of the discussions being had in this body. The three bills that we want to discuss today are AB 2002, and this is a bill related to the Regional Early Action Planning Fund, which is an item of support in our legislative program, was a focus of discussion on resources that are quite helpful in reaching regional housing goals and in the way of providing new resources. So this is a CalCog sponsored bill. It would permanently establish the REAP program in the state treasury for grants to support RHNA related planning activities to regional entities. The funding would be subject to annual legislative appropriations, so that's an important point. As we've discussed in the past, REAP is a critical resource for Sandag's Housing Acceleration Program and provides grant funding and technical assistance to support local jurisdictions with housing element implementation and compliance with new housing legislation. Permanent establishment of the fund would provide greater certainty for longer-term regional planning initiatives, but again, would require that annual appropriation process. The second bill we wanted to highlight is AB 2295. Thank you. Which is regarding RHNA allocation swapping. So this bill would authorize voluntary agreements between local governments to allow new housing development projects to count toward each locality's RHNA allocation if the project is jointly funded with at least $60,000 per unit and includes affordable housing units for very low and lower income households. So those are respectively 50% AMI and 80% AMI thresholds. This approach could provide additional flexibility for regional collaboration on affordable housing development, particularly in situations where one jurisdiction has more suitable sites or development capacity, but another jurisdiction has greater funding resources to apply. The high per unit funding threshold and affordable housing requirements are intended to ensure that swapping arrangements genuinely advance affordable housing production rather than simply shifting RHNA obligations. This concept aligns with regional approaches to housing that recognize the interconnected nature of San Diego's housing market, but it is important to note the reality that this bill will face headwinds in the legislature with the current climate around RHNA. The last bill we wanted to lift up is actually a bill that's pending specific language. This is a follow-up to a bill that was introduced and passed last year by the legislature, AB 650, which the Sandag board supported. Sorry, that was good. Thank you. The bill was actually vetoed by the governor with notes that the legislation would shift burden to HCD and caused the state significant resources in providing feedback to localities on their housing element deficiencies. The current status of this bill, AB 2296, is it's a spot bill. It does not have substantive text yet, but we are in communication with Cal Cities, who's the sponsor of this incoming legislation, and they've given us the specific expectations that the bill will extend RHNA timelines to provide local jurisdictions additional time to complete housing elements. The expectation is a 6-month timeframe. And it would require HCD to provide specific technical analysis to cities, but not issue corrective recommendations. So the idea to relieve the burden that was noted in the governor's veto message. The Extended timelines would provide member jurisdictions greater capacity to conduct meaningful community engagement and complete thorough housing element updates. And we will come back to the board and discuss in greater detail once we see the final text of that bill, but wanted to flag it for everyone's awareness. So for next steps, we are seeking committee feedback on the SB 79 implementation approach discussed by Stacy. We'd love to hear initial feedback on both the cleanup process for 79 that's playing out actively for 375 reform efforts and for the three bills that we just ran through. And then we would also like to just sort of let you know, we'll continue to keep you updated on 908 as that comes out. We'll bring that to the board. We'll continue to coordinate with regional and statewide partners on our advocacy strategies, and then we'll continue to come back and get your input throughout the year.
One comment before we go to questions. I wanted to make sure the committee knew that when our previous recommendations went to executive committee, staff truly did echo all of our comments about changing the order and putting RHNA first in terms of our priorities. So it was very gratifying to see that all the different suggestions we made were carried forward and reported out. So it made me feel like the RPC is being listened to. Now, of course, everybody in the executive felt the same way we did, so that was helpful. Nobody was disagreeing. So any comment you have to give, I can tell you they are being fleshed out and opened up to the larger organization, and specifically the city of San Diego's concerns over some struggles with getting it's not medium, Stacy. Thank you. Moderate housing, because I had never considered that until it came up at our discussion at the RPC. We're always worried about the low and the extra low. So that got engaged in the discussion at executive, and the staff presented our suggested language, and that's what went forward from executive. So with that, does anybody have any comments they'd like to make on the two presentations we have? Mayor, yes, Ellis?
Yeah, of course, SB 79 was where I'm going to go right away. And I'm glad to hear 677 was shelved, although 908, I am waiting with bated breath. Curious on the mitigations, what is magical about 35,000? Why 35,000? Why not 50, 100, 200, 500,000? What implementation issue occurs at 35?
It's a threshold already referenced in the bill. I don't know their origin of picking that specific number, if there is a magicness to the the specific number, but it's part of the threshold set out in the bill currently.
One would think it hits some sort of minimum size that you can handle a half-mile radius or urban core. But again, this is the fallacy of one size fits all. So I would like to see that number increased or exempt, because if you look at Sandag, 4 cities would fall under that out of our 18. So it's pretty minimal. So that's a comment.
I appreciate that, but you're looking at least 2 of them that are sitting here. So that certainly makes us happy.
I'm not saying lower it. I'm saying increase the number of exemptions because I think in the case of Solana Beach, I called it, this is when 677 would have targeted you because you have a Amtrak station,
right,
but not Encinitas. It's an existential threat. We're talking about putting in where we have no 3 and 4 and 5-story, or no 5-story buildings, 4-story buildings downtown. You don't either. Oh, I'm sorry, Del Mar. Yeah, I was thinking Solana Beach. Del Mar too. I mean, same. It's all the beach communities have the problem that we don't have those tall buildings, and then when we do start putting them up, we end up with the Miami Beach problem where we begin walling off the ocean. And is that what we want to do? And historically, when I go back with the city of Encinitas, when we founded, we based our height and story limit on Proposition D out of San Diego from 1972. I found it back in the general plan formation minutes that they said, hey, let's do like San Diego did. And I think it served San Diego well over the years in the beach areas. And I think it served Encinitas and our general plan well, and this is going to obliterate that. So I think it's an existential threat.
Mayor, to clarify, which I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but 677 was shelved, but we are all anticipating that language to be wrapped into 908.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I remind constantly, again, I've been there more than a minute, that the reason we have height limits in Coronado is because the Coastal Commission didn't like the big tall buildings that were put down on our beaches. Now they're telling us, do the same thing all over again. And they point at each other. So it's really frustrating when two different sides of the government are telling us do two different things at the same time.
Yeah, I think one point that, it's, you all know it, but SB 79 is approved right now, right? As a snapshot today, that's a law. So they're trying, it was presented as a cleanup bill that seems to be more of an expansion bill. So right now, it's also doing that assessment of what can we as regions negotiate, and what's the maneuvering area. So we can go and ask for a lot of stuff like increasing the minimum thresholds, that, or also trying to say, hey, but don't change some characters of interpreting. I'm going to just, speak on a couple of examples, the BRTs, right? And expanding what the interpretation of BRT, because then it expands the area, or other things that the team really are experts. So it is an interesting situation, swimming kind of against the tide, because also where there's being asked of an extension for the implementation. But if this extension will go in law, it wouldn't be until probably December, right? That this, if it's not an administrative, and therefore we need to figure out what has to go through by the time right now as it stands for implementation. So there's so many multiple strategies similar to the maps, right? We're getting ready to publish them. We're going to consult. We have been consulting with each of the local cities and the city managers. We're going to do it at the end of March and then probably publish the map. And more than anything, with the assumption that if nothing changes, the cities need ample time to submit alternate strategies if they so desire. So it is a multidimensional effort that's going on SB 79, and it's satellite bills that are trying to either enhance it, clean it up, or whatever.
Thank you very much. Did anybody else have any further comments? Yes.
Yeah, I think the only comment I would add, and thank you, Margaret, for talking about where 79 is, and appreciate that we'll continue monitoring 908. But I was actually curious. I know we discussed that 2295 seems unlikely to move forward. But given the discussions that we've had around VMT mitigation today, I've long thought that there should be some efforts to continue pushing for some kind of RHNA housing related mitigation bank as well. Because as folks have discussed in the room, I think the needs and differences in some of our smaller localities are going to be very different for an entity like the city of San Diego, and anywhere that we can provide some options to offer flexibility, I think would make sense, because there are places in San Diego that we certainly are trying to promote greater development of housing. And I'm sure there are certain areas in other cities where it just doesn't make the same amount of sense for a variety of reasons. So even if that bill doesn't move forward, I think any effort that we have to continue pushing on that front would be helpful, just to offer us flexibility here. So thank you.
I want to thank you for the presentation. I hadn't heard of the RHNA allocation swapping bill before, so I do find that interesting. Unfortunately, I think my city doesn't have the sites or the funds swap with anybody, but we'll think on that. But I do think that that's something that Sandag should support.
Did you get all the input you needed from us? Oh, I'm so sorry. Is there any comments, Francesca, from the public?
Yes, thank you. We do
Oh.
have one public comment, Mark Fairley. You can go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Mark Farley, and I'm a homeowner in Oceanside. I'm speaking today regarding the implementation of SB 79. As Sandag fulfills its statutory mandate to map the TOD stops, it's vital that the regional maps accurately reflect the criteria defined in the government code that was established by SB 79. Specifically, I want to emphasize any stations served by the light rail transit, such as the stations on the Sprinter line, must be classified as a Tier 2 stop. Furthermore, current published NCTD schedules show clearly that the stations facilitate 68 daily trips, which is nearly 40% higher than the state's 48 trip threshold for defining it as a high frequency rail. Also established by SB 79, the government code states that the regional maps carry rebuttable presumptions of validity. So if they're undermapped or exclude stations that clearly meet the technical criteria, it creates immediate legal and administrative uncertainty for property owners and housing providers who are planning for the effective July 1st date, which is only 4 months from today. And finally, the January committee notes mentioned that there's a push for cleanup legislation, which has been further discussed today, like SB 908, that will potentially delay implementation or limit the law to a Bay Area pilot program only. But it's worth highlighting that all of that proposed language, and I think it's been reaffirmed today, have only further confirmed the intent of the 48 trip definition. And a cleanup bill show the state is aware of some jurisdictions trying to use trickery, like including variable weekend schedules and service to artificially lower the daily trip count. So the cleanup legislation will not reduce the 48 trip count or relax the light rail transit definitions. It's clearly defined to reinforce them. So I urge this committee to prioritize technical accuracy over accelerating accepting excuses from some jurisdictions to delay it. We need an accurate map that reflects our housing goals. Thanks.
Thank you. That concludes the public comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan and Stacy. At this point, do we have anything else you need to hear from us on this item? No, okay, awesome. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you for the production team and Francesca for the meeting support. The next Regional Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 29th at May 29th, 2026 at 9 a.m. Thank you all.